Are you aware that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has already destroyed infrastructure worth billions of dollars? Yes, they have forced more than 12 million people from their homes and stopped exports from important Black Sea ports. The good news is that Western and Ukrainian authorities are already discussing how to restore Ukraine if and when the fighting is over. So guys, stay with me to the very end as we examine how much it will cost to restore Ukraine's infrastructure from its catastrophic state. The greatest battle in Europe since World War II began on February 24th as a result of Russia's most recent invasion of Ukraine, with severe and long-lasting humanitarian and economic repercussions. The United Nations reports that it has driven nearly one-third of Ukrainians from their homes, displacing 6.2 million people domestically, dispersing 7.8 million refugees across Europe, and killing or injuring more than 16,000 civilians. The UN thinks that the true death toll is probably far higher. According to the Kyiv School of Economics, the nation's buildings and other infrastructure have been devastated to the tune of at least $127 billion. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) anticipates a 35% fall in Ukraine's GDP this year. Because the government is dependent on the central bank to cover its budget deficit, inflation is currently running at more than 20%. The European Union, EU, and the United States, two of Ukraine's allies, have contributed billions of euros in military aid and humanitarian aid. President Biden signed two assistance packages into law, one at $40 billion in May and the other worth $12.3 billion in September. However, the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues to exact a terrible toll, from significant civilian casualties and the displacement of millions of people to the widespread destruction of homes, businesses, social institutions, and economic activity. The war damage that's been done to Ukraine has been widely seen and well documented by the global media and relief organizations. Now, there is a cost associated with the damage, a staggering figure put forth by the World Bank that estimates the price of reconstruction and recovery in Ukraine at $349 billion. That number assumes a war that ends tomorrow. So, of course, the figure will continue to grow. Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment, or RDNA, is an initiative by the World Bank, the European Commission, and representatives of the Ukrainian government. According to the press release, it's the first thorough assessment of the harm done across 20 key sectors in Ukraine since the Russian invasion. Additionally, it serves as a kind of road plan for what will be the biggest reconstruction effort in Europe since World War II. Now, precisely 8 months after the first day that Russian tanks entered Ukraine, Moscow's forces are stepping up their assaults on the energy infrastructure of their neighbor. In retaliation for recent Ukrainian military successes, Russian mortars and drones have been attacking Ukrainian cities for months now, including the capital, Kyiv. Germany has hosted 2 summits in Berlin since Moscow intensified the conflict to assist Ukraine in quickly restoring its vital infrastructure and ensuring the nation's post-war recovery. A German-Ukrainian economic forum was the first event, and the European Commission and the German government, which is currently holding the rotating G7 presidency, planned a conference on the recovery of Ukraine for the second. Berlin was quite clear that this was an expert meeting and not a donor conference. Along with representatives from international organizations, members of civil society, and executives from the business were present. The Ukrainian government and those of its allies, as well as international financial institutions and think tanks around the world, are planning the governance and financing of its recovery in the months following the war, as well as its longer-term reconstruction and modernization. This is happening even as Ukraine continues its efforts to reclaim territory occupied by Russia. All parties agree that it is time to start making plans for Ukraine's future, even if it's still unclear how long the war will last. This plan compiles several suggestions for planning Ukraine's post-war reconstruction. A coordination platform for help is now being discussed by the governments of Ukraine and the donor nations. The renovation and upgrading of housing stock and infrastructure, which will cost between $150 billion and $250 billion and fund 103 projects and activities, are the 2 largest parts of the plan. Between $120 billion and $160 billion will be spent on around 145 projects and activities to expand logistics and transportation facilities, such as airports, trains, highways, and ports, and integrate them with the EU. Other expensive goals include obtaining energy independence and producing green energy, which is expected to cost over $130 billion and involve the execution of about 21 projects and activities. The cost of ensuring access to funds through insurance, loan guarantees, and other programs is anticipated to be over $75 billion. 21 projects will be carried out with this money, and another $50 billion will be spent to boost high-tech and other prospective fast-growing economic sectors. The enormous cost of defending Ukraine from Russian armies, however, keeps rising daily. Around $3.94 billion in the monthly budget deficit for the Ukrainian government must be filled by at least a third of the existing loans and grants committed by the rest of the globe. According to a report by the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, the European Union, the United States, and other nations such as Britain and Canada have already collectively pledged 93 billion euros in armaments, loans, and humanitarian help to the Kyiv administration between February and early October. Ukraine is already struggling to pay for the conflict, let alone meet its existing debt commitments or fund its reconstruction, with an anticipated 30 to 35% reduction in its GDP this year alone. The World Bank, the European Commission, and the Ukrainian government calculated that the country had suffered overall losses of more than $252 billion as of June 1st, and that the cost of rehabilitation and recovery would be $348.5 billion. But that was before Russia escalated the fight by attacking Ukrainian cities and power plants. The Washington Post published an opinion piece that suggested the bill might even be $1 trillion. The estimated $300 to $500 billion in Russian assets that have been frozen by Western sanctions as retaliation for starting the war were even demanded released by Shmyhal, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, so that may be used for reconstruction. Donor countries now have to deal with the possibility of making significant financial commitments to Kyiv, as many of them struggle with their high levels of debt, rising inflation, and declining economic development. They will also be on the lookout for clear promises from Kyiv that the money would be put to the desired use. After Russia and Azerbaijan, Transparency International has named Ukraine as the third most corrupt nation in Europe. The Washington Post editorial described how Ukrainian billionaires had siphoned off hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign aid in recent years, alleging that the government was complicit in letting them exploit the country's state-run businesses as ATMs. According to Kiel's Ukraine support tracker, suspicions of corruption may be the reason why the EU has been slower than the US to pledge and distribute funding to the Kyiv administration up until this point. The US is currently devoting almost twice as much as the sum of all EU nations and organizations. This is a poor performance from the larger European nations, especially considering how slowly many of their pledges are reaching Ukraine. The summer's low number of new commitments now seems to be a recurring pattern. To prevent future deterioration of living circumstances and poverty in Ukraine, the government of Ukraine must now balance recovery efforts with the nation's immediate needs. These needs include key public services like health, education, and social protection. According to recent comments made by Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal to the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, the cost of the Russian invasion is now more than $750 billion. In preparation for the upcoming winter, the Ukrainian government is examining the unique needs in various areas. Customized recovery and reconstruction plans are being created to direct a program in each location based on the greatest objectives. Both the World Bank and the European Commission reaffirm their commitment to continuing to help the Ukrainian government. Future evaluations of the damage, loss, and recovery requirements in Ukraine will be necessary given the ongoing conflict. As well as providing financial support, the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, SECO, has committed to the project. Alright guys, this wraps up our video for today. Thanks for watching, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give a thumbs up, share, and subscribe for other awesome videos.